So before my students take a real test, I find myself repeating certain pieces of advice I've come up with over the years. Here are my 6 favorites, along with why I say them. So number 1, have one mantra per section. It's kind of hard to remember to do even one thing per section, let alone more than one, so try to pick one thing to make sure you execute for each part of the test. For example, you might say to yourself for each reading question, I'm going to play devil's advocate with my answer to make sure it's defendable. The idea is that if you pick too many things to focus on, you might forget to do them all. So pick one. Tip number 2, super important if you're stuck, confused, and or frustrated. Move on. Trying to power through a problem when you're stuck isn't a great idea, especially since you probably don't know why you're stuck. Doesn't matter if you should know how to do the problem. What matters is that you don't waste any more time on it, since there are probably other problems you can do. The beauty of this strategy is if you do move on and you have time to come back to the question, you may understand it once you've done a few other questions and have looked at it with fresh eyes. Maybe you just misread it the first time, or perhaps your brain just needed a few minutes to ponder it subconsciously. So guess on it, but then move on, come back to it if you have time. 3, give yourself a few seconds at the beginning and end of a question. This has to become kind of like a ritual almost, a habit. If you haven't noticed, the GRE is not just a content test, it's a reasoning test. So if you notice an opportunity to use reasoning, you may find a better way to do a question than if you had just rushed to begin it because you're under time pressure. Even if you don't notice that reasoning opportunity, reading the question carefully is much more likely to happen if you cultivate a deliberate way of beginning questions. At the end of a question, make sure your answer makes sense. Pausing to think for a few seconds as opposed to bubbling in as quickly as possible lets you consider the logic of your choice. Again, coming back to a question a few minutes later can almost magically produce new insight. So try putting your pencil down, give yourself a few seconds to read and notice. Tip number 4, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Kind of a weird paradox, but it's true. You ever try to put on your seatbelt too fast and have a catch? If you try to do something too quickly, you're more likely to make a mistake. Yeah, I know the test is timed and the clock is always ticking, but confident people don't rush. They know from practice and experience they'll get the test, or enough of it, done in time. You're naturally going to work as fast as you're capable of working. Don't try to force a quicker pace. This is going to help you avoid errors that might make you have to redo a step or a question. It's just like putting on that seatbelt. Tip number 5, do not expect perfection. Just like life, the real test is not going to go 100% perfectly. Just like life, if you pour too much time and energy into the problem, it may become even worse. But unlike life, on the GRE, all questions have the same value. It makes no sense to burn energy on one thing that isn't going well, even if you're trying for a very, very high score. As the Beatles said, let it be. Save your energy for the many, many other questions you'll have to do. Then finally, tip 6. Credit for this one goes to Erica Meltzer over at thecriticalreader.com. Taking a 3 to 4 hour test can be draining. In addition to going outside during any scheduled break to move around and stretch, build in mini breaks during sections. So for example, every time you're about to move on to a new reading passage, close your eyes, literally, take a deep breath, and not only will this relax you a little bit, but it will conserve your mental energy. So, the bottom line, it can be easy to get flustered and frustrated in the high-pressure situation of taking the GRE. Make sure you practice the above techniques every time you take a timed practice test so you'll actually have them in your repertoire on test day.